This is my D&D campaign diary slash retrospective. I had been doing a series of videos chronicling for posterity the current Shadow Dark campaign that I'm running. And I've been having fun doing it. I think it's like a fun creative exercise to do. And then it's also has the benefit of leaving a digital like artifact so that, years later, when we're all old and barely remember what the hell's going on, we can look back and reminisce fondly on our adventures in fantastical worlds. So I wanted to go back and do a series for the D&D 5e campaign that I ran and finished before this Shadow Dark campaign. This D&D campaign was my first experience in tabletop role-playing games. It's the same two players as that are in my Shadow Dark campaign. So my wife and my good friend, who's also a coworker of mine. Sort of background for like all three of us. I grew up playing the Baldur's Gate PC games in the 90s and the early 2000s. They're like Baldur's Gate 1, which later became Tales of the Sword Coast with its expansion. And then Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Am, along with its expansion, Throne of Baal, are two of my like top 5 games ever. They're games that I have come back to many, many times over the years. Like, they're comfort food for me. Love them. I never really knew or thought about growing up, like, what edition of D&D these games were based on. I had seen, like, oh, it's, like, 2nd edition, like, 2.5. And then once I got into the hobby and I started going back through, I started getting into the history of the game and everything, partially through Matt Colville's History of D&D, One Fighter at a Time series of videos. I think those were the first videos that like really got me into the history of it. And then, I just love that sort of thing. I don't know if it's just because like I'm a history guy. I just like history, so maybe that's why it appeals to me. Or maybe it's just because like I'm a nerd who likes my games a lot, and learning history of games you like a lot is fun. But this always follows for me, inevitably. Once I get into something, I will... It's only a matter of time until I, like, go diving through the history of it. But I had never played, like, the tabletop game. Oh, and Baldur's Gate, by the way, those games they're based on what you could basically call 2.5. It's a 2nd edition, which was released in 89. And then I think it was like the complete books is what like really changed that edition. There's like a complete book of fighters, and then like each class got their own, what we would call now like DLCs. So it was 2nd edition. That was back when they had everything was weird. I know people who love those editions will like defend them to the death. And I love those editions too, because I played them on computer for decades, and I came to learn the systems really well because I always want to get into all the numbers behind everything. So, yeah, they're cool. It's a cool system, but it is weird. Like, I think even people who like it can admit that like it's pretty weird. It's very finicky. You have to know like a lot of different like systems and stuff to like play the game. Makes it a lot easier when a computer's handling it for you. D&D 3rd edition streamlined a lot of that, and then D&D 5th edition even more so streamlined it, which is good because it helps newer players get more into it. That's my background. My wife's background. She didn't grow up playing Baldur's Gate like I had, but she in the sort of like big like Critical Role 5.0 era. She played a pretty long campaign with friends of hers in 5.0. And she was very into like Critical Role. She was very into like the culture of D&D basically. At a time where I was not at all. Like I knew that she was into it. I remember we actually did play like one session with my sister and my sister's boyfriend at the time. And then we ended up just not playing it again. Like I think, like I just didn't. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know what was different between then and now. But I just thought like tabletop role playing games were weird. I just couldn't. Maybe because I was just like too introverted. But I just couldn't like see myself or bring myself to do like role playing and stuff like that. And I don't know. I like TTRPG so much now that it's almost hard to like look back and remember what my mindset was that made me not like them. So she got into it. That was her sort of like background in the hobby. And then my buddy, my coworker, he had like no background at all. Like he hadn't played the Baldur's Gate games. He hadn't like played any tabletop role playing games. And then all three of us, when Baldur's Gate 3 came out, got really into Baldur's Gate 3. I will die on the hill. I will go to my grave that Baldur's Gate 3 is like maybe the best video game ever made. It's certainly top 10 video games of all time. Like it's just a staggeringly good game. The quality, like the dialogue, everything from the graphics to the dialogue to the combat. I mean, Larian Studios just absolutely fucking killed it. That's one of the greatest games ever. All three of us loved it, played it for hundreds of hours. My wife and I played through and actually finished an entire campaign, which is quite a feat in that game. I think our play time was like 110 hours on that campaign. I probably had like 20 characters or something in that game. Same thing with my buddy. He did the classic thing where he got all the way to the end, like all the way to the final battle, and then like to this day he's not finished the game. Classic gamer move. We all do that. But yeah, we were all just really into it, and we said, "Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's do this thing. Let's play some D&D 5th edition." So this campaign was that. And then after we had been playing this campaign for a while, I was kind of struggling at like the beginning getting into things because first of all, I dove in way too much. I bit off more than I could chew. I realized like sometimes you just need like more than a week to prep. I also didn't really have my prep process down at the time. I was downloading as much information as I could, as quickly as I could into my head, mostly via Sly Flourish, the Lazy Dungeon Master series. He was like my guy at the beginning. An invaluable resource to any new game masters, I think. And then later I got into Matt Colville. And those two, it's funny because they're polar opposites in a lot of ways, but they're very similar in other ways. Like, I think those two resources are very good in terms of just learning to play the game and how to DM. Those two resources are really good for anybody who's starting. And then, sometimes like I would just really not like be feeling it and I would like cancel the session, like the morning of, and like that never made me feel good. So eventually my wife, I don't remember if she suggested it or if I suggested it, but she started, prepping and then DMing her own campaign so that we could trade off if one of us wasn't really feeling it or we were just coming up on a session that really needed a lot of prep. then the other one could run. And she had a world that she had spent a lot of time already making because she had been prepping for a campaign that she was going to DM that never ended up starting. Classic D&D RPG stuff. Finding and holding together a group, as we all know, is the final end boss. There's nothing harder than that. So she already had like a ton of prep for this, her own homebrew world, and it didn't take her a lot to get that up off the ground into something that was like ready to go and operational. So, after maybe a few months, like 3 to 6 months of getting into the hobby, she started doing it so that we were like switching off. And then because we're all adults in our 30s, unfortunately we just don't get to play all the time. Sunday is the only day really that we can play. So if anything comes up on Sundays, we can't play. So I would say like on average, we've played every other week over the last like, it's probably 2 years at this point. And that's not always the same campaign. So sometimes we might, we might only play in a campaign world like once a month because we're alternating back and forth. But we do have streaks. Like sometimes I'll run for like 4 or 5 sessions in a row. Sometimes she'll run for like 4 or 5 sessions in a row. But that's, as like the background, all of our relations to the hobby. Relevant information for the background of this campaign. So this campaign, what this video is actually about, and what is going to be memorialized in this series of videos. I should probably name it. I should probably come up with a name for the campaign, but I have not. I did not at the time. This was sort of a bastard campaign born out of a failed one-shot. For our first game, I don't think I really had plans to like spin this into a campaign. We all just got together and, hey, let's play some D&D. I found a one-shot out of a book it's behind me on the shelf there, called the Game Master's Book of Random Encounters. These are the books. They're really cheap somehow. I don't really understand how they're so cheap because like they're pretty good quality. But you can get them for like $20, I think, at like Target. Like they're in all of like the big book retailers like Barnes & Noble and Target. So if you're into the hobby at all, like you've seen these things around. I also find them at half-price books all the time for like $10. So like it's crazy value. I have the whole series of them. So there's a one-shot from the Game Master's Book of Random Encounters called The Tomb of the Forgotten Paladin. I picked that one because it's very classic, and it's in line with like my experiences and like what I'm comfortable of running and stuff. It's just classic dungeon delve. Characters are like crossing a forest. They get lost in the forest, and then they stumble upon a tomb. End up like going down into the tomb, and there's an ancient paladin who was entombed there because of dark deeds in her life, and the fell magic that resulted from these dark deeds. Her tomb and her her sarcophagus or her corpse and all that are cursed now. And the idea of this one shot is you find her magic sentient sword and you use the sword to like defeat her guardians, kind of defeat her in combat, and then like lay her to rest. So I was like, yeah, okay, that seems cool. Seems like a nice basic thing to run for my first experience. So they both rolled up some characters. Characters to this campaign My buddy rolled up a halfling ranged fighter called Bo Billy. Yes, it's an absolutely ridiculous name. Um, I don't know what else to say. There it is. Bo Billy was his name. Um, and he's sort of like he's from a small town, modest, humble beginnings. He was part of the town guard, and then um, I think he took an arrow to the knee, the Skyrim guard meme, um, which ended his military career. And, he's self-conscious about it. It's sort of a sore spot. This is very much in line with something Matt Colville had said before, which is that everybody's first role-playing character is an idealized version of themselves, which my first character in my wife's campaign is certainly that. We're still playing that campaign. And for my buddy, this was, I think, certainly that as well. My buddy is an ex-military guy who ended up not finishing out his term of service in a way that, it seems like it hasn't really sat well with him. So he has like some kind of feelings about it. So there you go. I mean, just a one-to-one translation, essentially. And he's also, similarly, like, I think regards himself as like a, simple, humble, salt of the earth kind of guy. Now, my wife's character, this was not her first character. And also, unlike my buddy and myself, my wife has a history of, I don't know if role-playing is the right way to put it, but she grew up reading like fanfic, stuff like that. This is outside of my wheelhouse. I don't really know what's going on here or like where these places are, but she's she has background in a lot of things that I think make her more comfortable inhabiting roles that are like pretty different from herself. So her character is a tiefling named Melius, a tiefling bard. And, if you're at all familiar with the stereotypes and the jokes and the memes around tieflings, around bards, and around especially tiefling bards, my wife's character, Melius, basically fits all of those stereotypes perfectly. He is gay. He's extremely, he's not flamboyant, but he's very, he's well spoken. He's got like a semi-posh British accent. He's very like unexcitable, very laid back, cynical, motivated by like he's not just going to help just because, it's the right thing to do. He needs to have some self-interest, some benefit to himself, apparent, or he's not interested. His background is that he is an orphan from Luskin, where this campaign is set in the Forgotten Realms, the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms, I should specify, which I chose because that's the setting I'm familiar with. When I think of D&D, I think of the Sword Coast. So she is from Luskin up in the north. His character. Her character, him, sorry. He is the bastard son of a prostitute who worked at a brothel in the sort of like, the docks district of Luskin. I don't know a lot about Luskin, but I'm assuming there's a docks district, rowdy types, lots of seafarers and pirates and things like that. Doesn't know who his father is. I think his mom died at a pretty young age, and he ended up, by hook or by crook, down in Waterdeep, the huge, like million-person population city of the Sword Coast. And he cut his teeth there on the streets as an urchin. Came under the sort of tutelage of a well-known bard in the area. His name was Dev Chorus. And then my wife did a really good job building hooks for me, the DM, into her character's background. So she mentioned like a rival that she had growing up. And she mentioned that Dav Chorus, her mentor, had mysteriously disappeared relatively recently. That might have been why she was adventuring, or he was adventuring Melius, but I don't think so. I think it was kind of the typical he wants to get out, he wants to see the world, and maybe collect some stories. So that was good background work from a player standpoint, giving me the DM. Obviously I can incorporate either her rival that she had growing up or her missing mentor. The missing mentor especially is perfect, grade A stuff from the player. And for this one-shot adventure, it had them coming together. They were both looking to cross a forest. I believe in the adventure's description it said flooding had made it so that there was only one way to cross a stream at a particular bridge. And at this bridge there's a kind of local guide type character. Kind of like a local charlatan, honestly. Kind of scammer vibes, And he's saying that he will escort people across the forest for a fee. And that's the premise of the adventure. That you agree to this, and then adventure ensues. So, they talk to him, they agree. His name is Thump. And he's a very, kind of semi-ridiculous, over-the-top character. He's very, braggadocious, but a coward at the first sign of, any danger. He's navigating them through the forest. He becomes lost. He doesn't want to admit that he's lost. After a while, they become aware that they're lost, the player characters. And then they end up in this clearing in the middle of the woods with a large boulder. Into this boulder is driven a glowing golden sword. This is the sword of the fallen paladin. And it's shouting, I think, for help. It's been a very long time at this point. So it's shouting for help. There's twig blights being animated around this clearing. The evil from the tomb is corrupting the local wildlife, that sort of thing. So fight ensues. Thump, the guide, runs off at the first sign of danger. I remember having the sword yelling "Oh, grab me!" There's a table in the adventure where you roll on a chart that tells you what the personality of the sword is, and the result that I rolled was that it's fabulous and here to slay. So we have a flamboyant gay personality for this sword. So I'm having it, and the idea of the adventure is that one of the characters, the sword's supposed to be yelling for help. One of the characters is supposed to grab the sword and use it in the fight against like the blights because it's a super powerful sword. So I'm having it yelling out to the nearest character, which is Melius, like, "Oh, grab me, grab me!" And she's like, you know, she's not having her character do it. I don't think she was being like intentionally difficult, but I think it was just the way the fight was shaping up. She felt like there was more important things to do. So I'm trying to like, it's getting increasingly more urgent. Like, oh, grab me, to the point where it's like, we're all sort of laughing because it's like very obviously like above board, like you're supposed to grab this thing. So eventually she grabs it. Dude, it's like a +2 longsword that like gives magic resistance to like you and any allies within 30 feet. I think it does something else too. Magic resistance is so strong in 5e. So like it's a pretty ridiculous item, and obviously having a +2 weapon as a level 1 character is also ridiculously powerful. Yeah, it's. I have questions. I have questions about this adventure structure, looking back on it after a couple of years of experience. But they grab the sword, they win the fight, they go down. There's murals along like the entryway to this place that are depicting the history of the paladin entombed here. Obviously like a great hero of her time. Images of her winning battles, defending people. And then the later images are of her making some kind of pact, some sort of like dark power. That's what I can remember of the images. After the entryway, they reach the first sort of room, first sort of like challenge of the area. And it's like a void, like bottomless crossing. I think it's like 20 or 30 feet across, something like that. And there are like floating tiles that you like jump across to cross this area. And then on the edges of the room are sarcophagi that are piled with gold and treasure. They obviously recognize like that's dangerous. There's, that's your classic temptation. Like, hey, you level 1 characters, why don't you go grab this pile of gold? That's not going to fool anybody. But they do it, they're playing along. You have to make like dex checks to like leap across these individual tiles. Both of them are quite dexy, so it's not really an issue. I don't think, at least from memory. There's will-o-wisps floating in this area, by the way. And then as soon as any of the player characters take any of the gold pieces, the will-o-wisps, their color turns red and they become hostile. So I think as soon as they picked one up and the will-o-wisp turned hostile, they were like, oh, put it back. Okay. So they got the connection. They continue on. This is a pretty like 5-room dungeon style dungeon. And they have a fight with some either skeletons or zombies that reanimate basically as they go into the next room. I think they win that fight pretty handily. The sword, I think the sword does extra damage. Yeah, it does extra damage against undead. I think like 2d10 extra damage. Yeah, I think that's the other thing I was thinking of earlier, where this thing is just crazy for this adventure especially. Which, sometimes from a gameplay standpoint, it can be fun to just pick up like a ridiculously powerful thing that you're not going to have permanently, and just kind of like use it for a minute and be like, wow, that's a ridiculously powerful thing. That was fun to use. But it's also kind of weird. Like, it's not even really about your character at that point. It's just kind of about this item. I don't know. So they continue on. There's a chest in this room that they lockpicked. I think they lockpicked. I know that really only a thief can actually like use thieves' tools, but I think I either just hand wave that and say, yeah, you can lockpick, or it was just open. And I think they found some gold. I put a ring of protection in there. That might have been in the adventure. I'm not sure. It was either in the adventure or I put it in. Mostly because ring of protections are one of my favorite. Just favorite items from D&D. They were very prominent in the 90s Baldur's Gate games. In the first Baldur's Gate, it's like the first magic item you can get if you know where to look. If you've read your game facts. If you know, you know. So I put one of those in there. That's actually pretty strong. I think it's like a rare item. I think it requires attunement. But, it's just +1 to saves and +1 to AC. It's not crazy. So Melius ended up keeping that one. Kept that all through the campaign. There's like another little puzzle or challenge or two before they get down into the area that holds the paladin's sarcophagus. I'm pretty sure there was like a whole bunch of there was like a whole series of like weird rooms you had to go through in this like kind of undercroft area to get to the paladin's tomb. But when I was reading it, I just couldn't really it was difficult for me to discern what the hell was going on and like how these things were meant to interrelate with one another. And a lot of it was sort of like puzzly. So I just waved all that and said, yeah, let's get to the meat of the action here at the end, which I think I would have had to do anyway because the session, went for a long time, 4 hours or whatever. That's our typical session time. So I would have had to cut that content anyway just to get it finished. I think there was a roll. You end up fighting this paladin, this woman named Jocelyn. I think it's like Jocelyn the Oathbreaker is her title, and she's got her stat block in the adventure. And then I think you roll like 2d6 to see how many skeletons like animate around her. And I rolled 6 skeletons. Now, these are 2 level 2 characters at this point. They had leveled up once. Which I kind of did just because it's like, hey, we're playing our first session and leveling up is fun, so level up. So 6 skeletons and Jocelyn. And she wasn't crazy tough, but I mean, she was at least a CR3. So 6 skeletons plus like a CR3 at least creature is obviously like a crazy fight for 2 level 2 characters. And the idea in the adventure, she's described as having like ghostly ethereal chains, like manacled to her wrists that sort of like stretch into the either into her sarcophagus or like into the darkness behind her, something like that. And the sword is supposed to indicate to you to like destroy the chains. So, you're like unshackling her from her curse. And at that point, she, her spirit reverts to its formerly good nature, and the sword like goes to her, and that's the end. That's how it's supposed to go. I think for some reason I just never had the sword say that. Like I either forgot or for some reason I thought that like didn't work. I don't know. I mean, I messed up in like a few different ways. I mean, it was my first session ever running, so I didn't really describe to them what the hell they were supposed to do to win this encounter because it was an unwinnable encounter straight up. So they just fought it straight up, not having been given anything better to do, and they just lost very quickly. the Bo Billy went down. Well, they both went down. Bo Billy went down first, and then Melius was trying to like go back up the stairs to run away slash like do like a fighting retreat. And Jocelyn is ethereal, so she can just she just goes through the walls to follow Melius and takes him down. This was pretty. This was a pretty feel bad. It was a bad. It was a bad way to end our first session. If I recall correctly, I think there was like a little bit of recrimination, like finger pointing between me and the players, and I was like, "Oh, like you attack the minions in a boss fight? Like, don't you know? Don't you know from this setup? Like, you obviously attack the boss, and then these like animated minions who you saw animate will like disappear, which that's dumb. That's dumb for me to even say that because sometimes even in video games that's not always the correct path to take. And then them kind of saying like, well, what the hell was that? Like, how are we supposed to win that? And it's like, I mean, it's not their fault. I just messed up as the DM in multiple different ways. But that that didn't kill the hobby for us or anything, despite it being our first session. I think we all just kind of recognized, like, hey, we had a lot of fun, but it went badly at the end. And we, continued playing. So, that failure in the tomb with the Fallen Paladin, a.k.a. Death Knight, because that's what a Death Knight is, a Fallen Paladin who is undead. The Death Knight Jocelyn. That became sort of like the crux of the campaign. Like, I decided that they went in there and they had like awoken her, basically. And they brought her sword to her, like her powerful sword. So now they had unleashed this great evil upon the world. And that was what the rest of the campaign was going to be based around. And, looking back, I still feel okay about that concept. I can see some flaws in it inherently. It's kind of weird that the object of the campaign is in a spot where they know exactly where it is and they could go there at any time. But I think that worked out okay because they knew that they couldn't go there until they were strong enough to deal with this. So I think it worked out overall, but I'm not sure I would do that again as the basis of a campaign. So I did a little bit of like world building between that session and the next one. Built a small town nearby for them to sort of like run to and panic, And I described the session as beginning with them fleeing out of the woods in a mad panic. We retconned that they died. So, we retconned them dying. So they didn't die. They just lost the fight and they ran in a panic. Which we were all, retconning like that is super bad and very heavy-handed, usually. But, we all agreed, like, it was our first session we ever played, and we wanted to keep playing. So, and they liked their characters, so we were all okay with that. So they run out of there. They find the nearest road, stumble across it, really. And then as the sun's going down, the road drops down before them. They see a small seaside town. What did I call this town? Man, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Oh, when I think of it, I'll say it. But I put a good amount of effort into this town. I fleshed all the NPCs, like as many as is reasonable. have had like the full 9 yards of a name, an appearance, personalities, secrets, motivations, stuff like that. No, sorry, I thought of the name for a second, but I didn't. They sort of get acquainted with everybody. I think when they showed up in town, there was a bit of a kerfuffle going on. There was like a crowd of people at the sort of main like government building, and when my players came in and like observed what was going on, people were angry. People were saying that you know what had been going on in this town was that their shipments of they had two problems going on actually. So this is a fishing town. That's what they do. They fish and they sell their fish. They export them to Neverwinter, which is a couple days to the north from here. And from the sea, their problem has been that there's an island a short distance off of the coast from their town. There's a monastery on the island. Other than that, not much going on there. The townspeople don't have, a whole lot of interest in it. But for some reason, the last 2 or 3 shipments of salt have wrecked on the rocks of that island as they're coming into town. And without salt, they cannot preserve their fish to export it. And the other problem is that their overland route to Neverwinter has been raided, attacked. I can't remember at this point if it was like multiple times or just this one time, like one of their shipments went missing and hasn't come back. But in either case, so they have the problems getting things in from the sea that they need to export their goods, and then they're having problems with their goods that are being exported on the overland route being attacked and destroyed. So the characters, intervene. They talk to the local guy. I think the local guy's name is literally Guy. And I have there be 2 noble families from Neverwinter who are basically like the government of this town. And they are rivals. They are in opposition to one another in a peaceful sense, in a political sense. Which is something I like to do in almost all of my settings that are large enough to have like any sort of politics going on, which I don't think any setting needs to be large for politics to be going on, because humans are going to human. Or in this case, elves are going to elf, whatever, everything is political. Especially humans, I guess, in the setting. But regardless. So the guy who's currently running the town is the head of one of the 2 families down here, or at least their representative in this area. He's kind of a dick. I kind of set this up to be like your classic. The characters were like meant to like the people in opposition more than the current government structure. So they meet him, like I said, he's kind of a dick. He gives them, the quest basically, figure out what's going on with these things. They decide to go up the road to the north towards Neverwinter to investigate the missing shipment first, because it seems like less to bite off. So they head up there. I don't think it's super far. I think it's only a half a day until they find the caravan destroyed in the road. Pretty brutal scene. The caravan runner, the civilian guy, and as well as the guards of the 2 noble houses, the guards that had been sent along with this They're strewn about, evidence of like, something very strong, something with great force that destroyed these people. Just blood, gore all over the place. A very clear track of it, going away from the incident. Looks like bodies being dragged, big footprints. No effort whatsoever to like conceal this. So they follow this trail. It leads them to a cave where, after going in and investigating, they see that there's an ogre sitting around his fire. I think his back is mostly to them, so I don't think they would have been able to just walk like right up to him, but at the same time, he's angled in such a way that they can observe him safely to a certain extent. So they attack this ogre. Being the first like combat of the revamped campaign. I think this was like a pretty tough fight. I mean, I ran it straight out of the book, which for 2 level 2 characters, that is a pretty tough fight. Just a straight up ogre. The one thing I remember about this fight is like they were kind of like kiting it out of the cave. I remember it getting to Bowbilly, and Bowbilly's in melee combat with it, and Melius used a spell that knocked it prone, and Bowbilly wanted to move away from it, because its attack of opportunity while it was prone would be at disadvantage. I don't know if that's in the rules or if I just ruled that the attack would be a disadvantage because he's prone, but either way, that makes sense to me. And it still hit him even with disadvantage, and it like destroyed him. Like it knocked him out. But I think at that point, the ogre was so low that either Melius was able to finish it off by himself and then get to Bowbilly, or Melius just used like Healing Word as a bonus action to get Bowbilly back up, and they were able to finish it quickly. But either way, they win the fight. They recover the shipment, as best they can. They go back to town. They have their little post-quest sort of like celebration at the inn. The soldiers of the house who those guards belong to, they're sort of like in the corner, they're pretty sad. Like parties going on around them, but they lost a couple companions. Bowbilly goes over there and, gives his, as a fellow, former soldier, gives his condolences and understands their pain and is respectful. They have their little evening shenanigans. They rest through the night. The next day they go out to the island. They hire a fisherman to take them out there. They get to the island. This is, I stole this island and what's going on here out of one of the starter adventures for 5e, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle. I think it's a very good little self-contained chunk of content. I didn't use the storylines of the bigger plot that's going on here with there's a dragon here trying to do something evil and another dragon trying to stop him. I didn't use all that. I just used it as a setting in which to place my own plot, basically. Which was partially taken from or heavily inspired by also what was going on in the adventure. So in my campaign, what's going on with the salt shipments crashing into the rocks of this island is that a ship that was carrying... So there are sirens there are sirens that have like roosted on the edge of this island recently, and they've been luring ships in to crash against the rocks with their song. And one of these ships had a cult member of a cult to Orcus on its ship as a passenger. And this cult member was carrying, unbeknownst to her, she was carrying the key, like an old relic that is the key to another relic, basically. In order to get to a very powerful relic, you need the key that this cult member had on her, unbeknownst to her. And this thing is, powerful enough, tainted enough that it sort of radiates like a deadly, evil, necrotic magic off of it. And this magic is causing undead to appear on the island. So, as the characters are here dealing with the sirens, which is basically the crux of the problem, they are also coming across undead. And they're sort of pointed to the ship that had the cult member in it with the relic. I'll call that the key, and I'll call the other more powerful thing the relic. So they're pointed towards the shipwreck with the key on it by the leader of the monastery that's on the island. Her name is Runara. She is actually a dragon. She is a gold dragon in disguise, in her polymorphed human form. And she is here to guard the tomb of an ancient red dragon that may or may not actually be dead. So that is her charge. That's why she's here on this island. And also, as the campaign goes on, that's the excuse to keep her from, helping out, What do you do with the powerful NPC who is good, who is motivated to do good things? Why wouldn't that NPC just solve everything? Because she has a bigger thing to deal with. She is charged with keeping watch over the tomb of this ancient, powerful evil. Also, she's a dragon, and this thing is a dragon. They're doing dragon things. Like, this is important. And the sanctuary, like half the sanctuary members are like kobolds, which they had fun with. Just these little yapping, like dog-type creatures. I am trying to remember where this cult member, why she was going this way, like what she was on the ship for and where she was going. I think she had been drawn to this area. I think she was feeling drawn to this area because in this area is the location that her key unlocks. And inside there is the relic, the powerful thing that is the MacGuffin of this campaign. So the key carried by the cult member on the ship that wrecked on the rocks of this island because of the sirens unlocks a local dungeon inside of which is the relic that is the MacGuffin of this campaign. That sounds really complicated. I don't think it's really that complicated, but I guess it's difficult to describe in one sentence. So, and there's also a couple of non-kobold monastery members here, at least one of which had a kind of little side quest thing that the players did, where he used to trade mushrooms, I think, to a local colony of myconids, or he traded something to them and they traded him back mushrooms, something like that. And he would use these things to make healing potions. And then recently, the last time he tried to go there, he was chased away by a big, like plant octopus-looking creature. So he wants to player characters to go there and investigate and see what's going on. And they agree. And he agrees to give them some healing potions that he can make once he gets his ingredients. They go to do that before they go to do the shipwreck with the cult member and the key in it. And we'll leave this video there. I think that was, including the first session, that was the first two and a half sessions of the campaign. I don't know how many sessions each of these videos is going to cover. It's just going to be me talking. Things just kind of take as long as they take as I bring up whatever I think is like relevant. I think the campaign was a total of about 20 sessions. Maybe a little under 20 sessions for the whole campaign. So I don't know, maybe like, God, I hope it's not 10 videos actually. That's a lot, but I still remember a good amount of it pretty clearly. And I do want to get down what I remember before I forget over the years. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it might be like each video covering like 2 sessions, just depending on what I remember. So yeah, video number 1.